Hey everyone, welcome to another video in this series about creating a chat app in Flutter the right way. In this video, we'll be looking at creating our receipt service so that we can send and receive message receipts. Now, if it is your first time here, please consider subscribing to the channel as we offer guides as how to go about creating software using Flutter the right way. Using various software design principles and overall clean architecture. And remember guys to like the video, to share so that we can grow the channel. Alright, so let's get into it. So we want to go inside of our lab source models folder and we're going to create our receipt model. So let's just go ahead and create our receipt model. And for our receipt, there are certain properties that we will want. So for example, we will want our recipient, which is the user for that receipt, to whom that receipt will be sent. We want also the message ID for that receipt. And we want a receipt status, and I'll create a enum for this. I'm just gonna call it receipt status. We want our time, date, timestamp. And always our ID, which our database will generate automatically for us. String ID. And we're just gonna use a getter so that we can access that ID from the object. So there we have our basic properties that we'll be using for receipt class. Let us now go ahead and create that enum. So for our enum, which I'll call receipt status, I'm just gonna store 3 state: sent, delivered, and read. And I'm also gonna create some extension methods on our enum, and I'm gonna call it enum parsing to make it easy to parse your enum value to string and from string back to enum. And I'm using the new Dart extension methods. So I'm just gonna say create that extension on my receipt status enum. I'm gonna add 2 methods here. I'm gonna add a value method, and this will return the value of the particular enum that I'll reference. So I'm just gonna say this, and this will reference the receipt status or the enum, and I'm just gonna say to string, and I'm gonna split that enum using the period and give me the last element of that array. So if you are familiar with how enum works, whenever you to string the enum, for example, the result would be receipt status, say sent. So this would, if I have my receipt enum set to sent and I call it to string method, then it will return all of this. But I want just the sent portion, and that is why I split the enum and get the last part only. So now I can get access to the value of the particular enum, the value that I am using. Also, I'm going to create a static method that returns a receipt status, and I'm just going to call this method from string, and you can already guess that I'm just going to pass in the string value for the particular enum that I want, and it will return an instance, not an instance, but it will return that value, the receipt status value, from my list of enums. So here I'll just say return receipt status, get the list of values, and I'm just gonna iterate through that using the first where, and I'm just gonna say first where element value is equal to the value that I enter. So here I can say, okay, give me the enum representation for sent. So I'll pass in sent here, and it will return, for example, it will return receipt status dot sent, which would be then the proper value based on the enum type here, since this cannot be set to string. So now we have our extension set up. Now we go back to our class here and create our constructor. So my receipt constructor, and I'm just gonna pass in all these values. So I'm just gonna say this recipient message ID timestamp. So those are all the required fields for my enum. And again, I'm just going to create those helper methods to convert it easily from JSON and to JSON. So for my to JSON method, I'll just say, and this will return JSON object recipient So here's my JSON object, and this basically will be stored in our database. So we have the recipient, the message ID, the status, given the value. Now we're calling our extension method here value to return just the enum value type here, and strip away the name of the enum itself. So we have all these fields for our receipt that will store to the database. And I'm just going to make the return type explicit, which is of map string dynamic. So that's the return type. And then we'll go ahead and create our factory method here, which is our receipt from JSON. And this will create a receipt object from the JSON object that we'll receive from the database. So dynamic JSON. And again, this is very similar to what we have done before with the message factory. So here we have created our receipt object from our JSON object, and basically just getting all the values from our JSON object and assigning them to the appropriate receipt property or attribute. And as you can see here with our status, we are using our enum parsing, that static from string method, to parse our status into the appropriate enum type and our timestamp. And of course, as you can see, I've gone ahead and also changed the parameters in the constructor to be named parameters with the required attribute so that our code will be more readable. So this is our receipt model that we will be using in our receipt service. So we can go ahead and under services create a new folder, and there we will create our receipt service, which is our receipt service contract. We'll go ahead and we'll say abstract class iReceipt service. And you might be wondering, why do I create so many abstract classes? And this is to keep my application decoupled from actual implementation detail. So each of the services are actual low-level implementation detail that is specific to the particular database that I might be using. So I want to keep my application decoupled from that. So if I choose at any point to change my data layer, I can change it without much change required in the application, where I can say, for example, if I change this from RethinkDB to, say, Firebase, all I need to do is to create an implementation of that Firebase service that implements my iReceipt service, and then further in the application, all I have to do is to switch out that what I have now, my receipt service, which is of course RethinkDB, to that Firebase service. And it's basically just plug and play. Very simple, very easy to modify, and very easy to extend your application without the need for much change. And so in a sense, we are following the open-close principle of the solid principles, where our application is open to extension but closed for modification. So here we have our iReceipt service with just two methods to send a receipt, and again our stream, which is pretty similar to our message service, so that we can subscribe here to receive receipts. So now if we should go ahead and our receipt service implementation impl class receipt service implements the iReceipt service, and you can literally go ahead and just copy the message service and change it out one by one, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just gonna go into my message service. I'm gonna copy all these except for the remove part. Copy that, and I'm gonna paste it here. So now all I need to do, import the appropriate libraries. I do not need encryption for the receipt. Stream controller, instead of message, this will be receipt. Have our subscription here. This should be receipt service instead. No encryption. We want our dispose method, right? Instead of messages, this will be receipts. And this accepts a user, which is not a named parameter. So we have our user, and this will return a receipt. So we can literally change this method to say start receiving receipts. And for our, let's pass in the user here. For our send, we send a receipt instead of message. I'm just gonna change wherever I see message to receipt. Then I am just gonna remove this since there's no encryption, and I'm just gonna insert the data, and that's it. We send our receipt. For our start receiving receipts, we need to go to the receipts table. We filter by the user, which is here we need to be recipient. So we filter by the recipient of the receipt, which will be us. So we are filtering, we want only those receipts that are sent to us. We change these messages again to receipt. We have our receipt from feed. We do not need to remove anything. And we change this method here to be receipt from feed. Return a receipt. And we don't need all of this. Remove this. We literally return receipt from JSON. And that is our receipt service. Pretty straightforward, pretty similar to our message service. And all our subscription services will have a similar setup. For example, our typing notification service, so that we can update the user when the user is typing. So it's very similar to our message service. So we can go ahead now and try and test this to ensure that it is working as it should. And first thing in our side of our helpers, go ahead and copy this. Change from message to receipts. Go ahead and copy this also. Change from messages to receipts. So there we update our helper. Now we can go ahead inside of our tests and add that test class. In this case, it will be receipt service test. test is pretty similar to the others also. We'll have our rethink DB instance here. We'll have our connection and our receipt service, which is our system under test. Go ahead inside of our setup method. And we will configure those dependencies. So our connection connect, we can literally use just connect, because by default, if you look by default, the database is test, host is localhost, and the port is the appropriate port. So we can just use connect without adding the connection info. So I'm just gonna say await, and I'm gonna call the create DB from the helper method with my connection and my rethink instance, then instantiate my receipt service, passing in the rethink instance and the connection. So now I'll also set up my teardown method, or teardown hook or block, and I'm just gonna dispose, call the dispose method of my receipt service, and then call the cleanup DB or clean DB. And pass in R and the connection. So now for our test, I am just gonna create a user, final user equal user from JSON, pass in the JSON object, then let's say the user ID is 34, this user is active, true, last seen, so there is my user. And then for my tests, I can go ahead and write my tests. So the first test is, of course, to ensure that the receipts are sent successfully. So I've just gone ahead, create a receipt here, message ID, status, say that this receipt was delivered, and then send the receipt. So I'm expecting that it should return true to say that this record was inserted into the database. So as you can see here, we are getting some errors. Could not connect to localhost, error connection refused, dispose call and null. And the thing is, I have not started my Docker container, and that is very important. That when we just start, if we had stopped our rethink instance, if I say Docker container ls, then you can see that there are no running instance. But for my container, and that's the name, I can go ahead and say start. That should start the container. And if I go ls again, I should see the running container, which is great. So now if I should go back here again to my test and run my test, then you can see that my receipt was successfully sent. And for my second test, it's just to ensure that we are subscribing to and receiving receipts successfully. So here I've gone ahead and created the second test, which is to successfully subscribe and receive receipts. And it's very similar to our messages subscription test, where we basically subscribe here, listen with the user, and we use this expect async method to determine the count, the number of times we receive a receipt from the subscription. And here we are checking that the recipient of the subscription is the user that we have created here. The recipient of the receipt, rather, is the user that we have created. So we've gone ahead, created 2 receipts, and the recipient in both cases, or in both receipts, are the same user. And we send both receipts. So we are expecting that we should receive 2 receipts here, which is suggested by the call count. So this method will be called twice, and twice the recipient will be the same user. So if we go ahead and run that, we can see that it is working. We are successfully subscribing and receiving those receipts, and that is wonderful. So we have created our receipt service, and we have successfully tested our receipt service. I'm just going to go ahead, close all these windows inside my Git. I'm just going to say add receipt service. And now I'm going to look at creating or typing notification service, which is very similar to what we have done so far. So inside of our models folder, I am going to create a model that represents our typing event. Typing event, and for this event I'm just gonna say send this typing event from one user to another user, and the particular event that I am sending, which I'm just going to call typing, which will be represented by an enum. Again, I'm going to get the ID and this so that it can be, in this case, the ID is so that we can reference this event and remove it from the database as soon as possible. But this model really doesn't need an ID, but for the cleaning up of this event from the database, we are going to store the ID. So for my typing event, I'm just going to say at required from this to this event. So now for my, let me go ahead, use the getter again for the ID. So now for my typing enum, it's pretty similar to my receipt. So I'm just gonna create an enum called typing, and then I'm gonna say start stop. So typing start, typing stop. And for those two enums, I'm gonna do something very similar to what I did for my receipt, which is to create those two extension methods for parsing the enum. So again, here are the two extension methods. Typing parser on typing. Again, this very same thing, split and from string. And I am sure there's a better way this can be done so that the class or the methods are pretty dry, so that we do not have to keep on doing the same thing over and over. But I'm just going to leave that for you guys to figure out. And again, for my typing event, I'm just going to create those two methods, the toJSON method and the fromJSON factory method, which has been the same thing we've been doing that you guys should be pretty much accustomed to now. So I'm just going to do those two methods quickly. So there we have our two methods, our toJSON and our fromJSON, which has the from_to and the event, the typing event. And from JSON, we create a new typing event based on the JSON returned from the database. So that's pretty much our typing event model, along with those typing enums. So now we can go inside of our services, and I'm just gonna create a folder called the typing, and we can create our typing service. In this is the case, I'm just gonna say typing. I'm just gonna call it typing notification service contract. Typing notification. Just gonna create very similar things to our receipt service. Send, and in this case I'm gonna send a event, and this event is a typing event. And again, stream typing event. I'm gonna say subscribe, and here I'm gonna pass in the user, that is the user or the person who is subscribing to this event, to receive typing events. And I'm gonna pass in a list of user IDs, and these user IDs will represent those persons whom I want to receive events from. So it's gonna filter out even further, so that I am not subscribing to receiving typing events from every typing event that hits the database, but typing events only from persons with whom I already have a chat thread going on with. So that's another layer of filter that kind of makes it more efficient or speed up the whole typing event process. So now we can go ahead and create that. So typing, I'm just going to call it typing notification. And again, this is very similar to our receipt server. Typing notification. This implements typing notification. Go ahead, create those two overrides. Now for our dependencies, connection, and our rethink DB instance. We want also our stream controller. Stream controller of type typing event, and this will be a broadcast stream. We want our stream subscription for our change feed. And inside of our constructor, go ahead and get our connection and our rethink instance. Now inside of our send event, I am inside of our send event here. Just gonna make these required. I'm also gonna ask for the user to which this event is sent. And the reason why I'm asking for that is I want to check first if that user is active. So if that user is not currently active, then I do not want to send that event any at all. That's waste right there. So I'm just going to return false. Otherwise, I can go ahead and send the event by inserting it into the typing events database. So here we insert our record into the typing events collection or table using the JSON object from our event. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this rethink instance private also. So there we have our insert method. We also need at all times, once we have stream involved, to dispose of those stream control and cancel whatever subscription we have when we close our application. I'm just gonna create that and change feed. Just gonna say cancel that. Use that optional operator, and also for the controller I am just gonna close that. So now for our subscribe event, it's pretty similar to what we've been doing. So I'm just gonna write the code and then explain as usual. So I've gone ahead and write the rest of the code since this is very similar to what I've been doing so far. And here we have users ID. I'm just gonna change that to user ID, and inside my contract also user IDs. So what we have done is that we have created this start typing events method, which basically, as we have done before, connects to the typing events collection, subscribe to it for changes, and here we filter by event. So we filter and we return where events 2 is equal to the user which should receive those events, and also where user IDs that we pass in contains event from. So this might seem a bit complicated, but it's really not. We're basically using some rethink DB expressions to really filter what we are doing. And what we're really saying is that all I want to get or to receive events for is for those events that are sent to me, and they are coming from the list of user IDs that I send here. So in other words, they are coming from my current active chats or threads that I have. So if I do not have a current active chat, then I shouldn't be receiving any typing events, since there's no chat with that particular person to receive typing events. And then again, we have a changes, we are as stream, and we listen for those events, and we loop through those events, check if the data is null, then we return. If the data is not null, then we pass the data to this event from feed to create or type in event object from the JSON data, and then we add that to our controller, so it will be returned to the clients that have subscribed to this to receive these events. And then after I send that event to the clients who have subscribed, I remove that event from the database using this method, remove event. So I pass in the event and I use rethink, connects to the typing events table, get the event based on the ID and delete that event, setting the return changes to false so that rethink does not return the deletion as a change here. So it's very straightforward and similar to what we have been doing so far. So we can go ahead and quickly write tests for this or typing events or typing notification. So we'll go ahead here and we'll say typing notification tests or usual setup again, rethink, with our connection and also our typing notification as our system under test. Go ahead with our setup method and we'll connect. So connection R connect. Then we'll create our database objects with said connection and instantiate our typing notification with those objects. So now we have that. We can set up our teardown also to just clean up after us. So for our teardown, we call our dispose on our SAT and we clean up our DB. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and create two users. My two users, and then for my first test I want to ensure that it sent typing notification successfully. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create this test. So here for this test I am creating a typing event, and I'm saying that the event is from user 2 to user 1 and the event is typing start. So I'm sending that event to user 1 and I'm expecting true. So if I should go ahead and run this test. As you can see, our test is passing. We are successfully sending our typing notification. And so for our next test, I'm just gonna write another test that is very similar to what I've been doing so far, to test that we are subscribing and receiving these events. So here we have our second test, which is to subscribe to receive these events using this listen command, listen method, callback, and passing our expect async method with our expectation here, which is that we'll receive the event from user with this ID, and it should be called twice since we are sending typing event twice. So we are creating a start typing event and a stop typing event, and we are sending both events. So the expectation is that the user will receive both events. So if we go ahead and run this test just to see what is happening here, then we can see that we successfully subscribe and are receiving those events. So that is wonderful. We have created our typing notification and everything is working as it should. So again, in this video we have done two things. We have created our receipt service and we have created our typing notification, which is great. So I'm just gonna stop here for this video, pushing the code to GitHub, and to thank you guys for tuning into this series. I truly hope that you are enjoying it thus far, and if you are enjoying it, do not forget to like, to share, and to subscribe so that we can grow this channel and help each other grow as Flutter developers. because the industry is growing and we need robust Flutter developers that can create production ready applications. So thank you guys for tuning in, and see you in the next